Whenever the Jeffrey Epstein story comes up, it feels like we hit a wall. It just cycles through the same outrage, the same conspiracies, but we never really get anywhere. This analysis suggests that's because we've been looking at it all wrong, treating it like a story about a few bad people. But what if it isn't? What if what we're actually seeing is a crack in the system itself, a moment that reveals something deeply unsettling about how power and our institutions really work? So let's dig into that.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about why the questions we usually ask just lead to dead ends. Then we'll look at this whole thing through a new lens on desire. We'll get into the tough structural dynamics at play, reframe Epstein's role as something other than a mastermind, and, this is interesting, draw a parallel to modern AI. And finally, we'll wrap up with what this all means as a major warning for us today. All right, so first things first. To really get our heads around the Epstein moment, we have to start by admitting that maybe, just maybe, our whole approach has been off. We've been asking the wrong question all along. This is the one, right? The question that just hangs in the air. Why would these titans of industry, brilliant scientists, presidents, people at the absolute top of the food chain, get anywhere near this? It doesn't seem to make any sense.
And here's the twist. The problem isn't that there's no good answer. The problem is the question itself. It's a trap. It sends us down a rabbit hole because it's built on a foundation of assumptions that just aren't true.
I mean, think about the assumptions baked into that question. We kind of believe that being super smart means you're automatically super ethical, that a fancy education somehow tames our primal urges, or that once you have all the power in the world, you're somehow stable. Well, the Epstein moment just blows all of that out of the water. It shows us that sometimes being intelligent just means you're better at justifying the absolute worst behavior.
So, if we want to ask a better question, we need a new tool. The source material for this explainer pulls out a psychoanalytic lens, a Lacanian one, to be specific, that totally shifts the focus. And it starts with a pretty radical idea. This whole thing isn't really about pleasure, not in the way we usually think about it anyway.
Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, in this way of thinking, desire isn't about getting the thing you want and then feeling satisfied. It's more like this constant, nagging feeling of being incomplete, a fundamental lack that can never, ever be filled. It's the engine that's always running, but the goal is never actually satisfaction.
And here's the real paradox. For people with extreme power and wealth, that feeling of lack doesn't go away. In fact, it gets worse. I mean, think about it. When you can buy literally anything, money becomes meaningless. When you're the most famous person in the room, status is just boring. Achievement doesn't give you that same rush. All the goals that give the rest of our lives meaning, they just evaporate, leaving this huge, restless void. And this gets us to the real pivot point. The question isn't why sex? That's a question about pleasure. The real and much more chilling question is why transgression? When every other boundary has been conquered, why the need to cross the one that is most forbidden? Now, this brings us to the most difficult part of this whole affair. And to really understand the horror here, the source material argues we have to look at it structurally, not just sensationally. This quote right here is the key. The focus wasn't on a specific erotic preference in the typical sense. It was about finding a situation of absolute asymmetry, a power imbalance so extreme that the other person is effectively erased as a human being. You see, structurally, a child is in a unique position. They exist outside the normal social contracts that we adults operate under. There's no equality, no reciprocity of power. It's a space where the very idea of consent becomes meaningless because the structure itself makes it impossible. So this isn't about a bad choice being made. It's about the total annihilation of another person's agency.
So if the drive was transgression, where does Epstein himself fit in? Well, this is where our analysis takes a huge turn. We stop looking at the individual and start looking at the system he built.
The popular story paints Epstein as this evil genius, a puppet master pulling all the strings. But the structural reality is something different and honestly a lot more frightening. He wasn't the master, he was the infrastructure. He was the broker of access, the shield from consequence, the operator of a system built for deniable desire.
So let's be crystal clear about this. His function, his entire purpose, was to allow these transgressions to happen without inscription. That means no records, no names on a list, no contracts, no accountability. He engineered a private world where the very concept of consequence was designed to simply disappear. Now, this idea of a system that just runs without anyone being truly responsible should sound disturbingly familiar. To make this less abstract, the source material draws a powerful parallel to the rise of AI and to something it calls the Moltbook moment.
And when you put them side by side, the comparison is just stark. In the Epstein system, you have desire and harm circulating, but there's no single subject who's responsible. With large AI models, you have language and meaning circulating, but there's no real author. In both cases, the core danger is identical. You have a massive, powerful structure operating with zero responsibility.
And this, right here, is the big aha moment. When the main goal becomes just to keep things moving, whether it's data on a network or transgressive desires in a private club, when circulation becomes more important than accountability, the result isn't freedom. The result is obscenity. The system itself becomes obscene.
Okay, so let's pull all of this together. Why does this kind of deep structural analysis matter so much right now, way beyond this one horrific case? Well, because it's a massive structural warning. You know, the real scandal was never, wow, smart people can do terrible things. We know that. The true scandal is that our major institutions, finance, science, law enforcement, were built with a blind spot so huge it allowed an entire private system of desire to operate completely outside the law and outside of ethics.
These are the warning signs of the dangerous new systems we're all facing, whether they're run by humans or algorithms. Responsibility gets replaced by sheer circulation. Accountability gets replaced by access. The structure moves so fast that our ethics can't even keep up. And when something terrible happens, it's not seen as a personal failing, but as a systemic glitch.
And it is so important to get this right. The point of this kind of analysis is not a witch hunt. It's not about making a list of names. That's the old way of thinking that gets us stuck. This is a reality check, a hard look at the systems we actually live inside of, and a recognition of a deep structural flaw that has emerged.
Because at the end of the day, the lesson from the Epstein moment is a stark one. It shows us what happens when our most powerful systems are designed to erase accountability. And if we choose to look away, if we dismiss it as just a weird, one-off conspiracy, we're not being skeptical. As our source concludes, we're just being naive.